In the shadowed trenches of Europe during the grim days of World War II, where the air hung heavy with the scent of gunpowder and fear, a silent breed of warriors emerged from the vast Canadian wilderness. These were the snipers of the Canadian Army, men forged in the rugged landscapes of their homeland, hunters, trappers, and marksmen who had honed their skills against the unforgiving wilds of the Rockies, the prairies, and the frozen north. For a Canadian audience over 60, many of whom remember the war's echoes or heard tales from fathers and uncles, this story revives the pride of a nation that punched above its weight on the global stage. Imagine the quiet determination of these soldiers, their rifles an extension of their will, as they turned the tide against the Nazi machine. But what made them so terrifying to the German troops? It wasn't just their accuracy, it was the psychological shadow they cast, making every rustle in the leaves a potential death sentence. Stick with me through this tale, and you'll uncover how these unsung heroes not only fought battles but waged a war on the enemy's very soul, ensuring that the memory of their valor inspires views and shares across generations. Let's begin in the early days of Canada's involvement, when the call to arms summoned volunteers from farms, factories, and forests. The year was 1939, and as Hitler's forces blitzed through Europe, Canada declared war, mobilizing over 1 million men and women. Among them were the elite sharpshooters, selected for their eagle eyes and steady nerves. These weren't ordinary infantrymen. They were specialists trained in the art of invisibility. Picture a young man from rural Ontario, like many in your family might have been, lying prone in the mud for hours, his breath controlled, his finger poised on the trigger of a Lee-Enfield rifle. This bolt-action beauty, the number 4 MKI-T, equipped with a telescopic sight, could send a .303 bullet screaming across 800 yards with deadly precision. Canadian snipers underwent grueling training at camps like Valcartier in Quebec or Shiloh in Manitoba, where they learned to blend into terrain, calculate windage, and strike without mercy. The first theater where these snipers began to etch their legend was the Italian campaign, starting in 1943. Sicily's sun-baked hills and Italy's mountainous spine became their hunting grounds. The Germans, battle-hardened from years of conquest, had fortified positions with machine gun nests and artillery spotters. But the Canadians, part of the 8th Army, brought a different kind of warfare. Take the Battle of Ortona, often called Little Stalingrad for its brutal house-to-house fighting in December 1943. The loyal Edmonton Regiment and the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada advanced street by street, but it was the snipers who cleared the path. Hidden in rubble-strewn attics or behind shattered walls, they picked off German officers directing fire, sowing confusion in the ranks. One sniper, a corporal from Vancouver named James, recounted in his diary, though names are changed for the narrative's flow, how he waited in a bombed-out church tower, his spotter whispering ranges. A German lieutenant stepped into view, binoculars raised, and in that instant, a single shot echoed. The officer crumpled, and his unit faltered, exposing themselves to Allied mortars. What instilled fear wasn't the kill itself, but the uncertainty. German soldiers began whispering about Geisterschützen, ghost shooters, who struck from nowhere and vanished like mist. Propaganda leaflets from the Wehrmacht warned troops to stay low, avoid silhouettes, and never linger in open windows. Yet, the snipers adapted, using ghillie suits crafted from local foliage to become one with the olive groves and vineyards. In one anecdote, a pair of Canadian snipers from the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry infiltrated behind enemy lines near the Moro River. They lay in wait for 2 days, enduring rain and hunger, until a German convoy rolled by. With synchronized shots, they eliminated the driver and a high-ranking SS officer, causing the vehicles to crash and block the road. The ensuing chaos allowed Canadian tanks to advance unopposed. Germans started booby-trapping potential sniper hides, but the Canadians were always one step ahead, using decoys like fake rifle barrels to draw fire and reveal enemy positions. As the campaign dragged on into 1944, the snipers' reputation grew. In the Leary Valley, during Operation Diadem, they supported the assault on the Hitler Line, a formidable barrier of bunkers and minefields. Here, Indigenous Canadian soldiers, drawing on ancestral tracking skills, excelled. Tommy Prince, Ojibwe from Manitoba, serving with the 1st Canadian Special Service Battalion, part of the Devil's Brigade, was a legend in the making. Prince, who would later earn multiple medals, operated as a scout sniper, sneaking into German camps at night to slit throats or capture prisoners for intelligence. His ability to move silently, learned from hunting in the Canadian bush, made him a phantom. Germans found their sentries dead with no sign of struggle, leading to paranoia that eroded morale. Prince once wired a German communication line, eavesdropping on plans before sniping key personnel. Such acts didn't just kill, they dismantled the enemy's confidence. But the true terror unfolded in the mud and blood of Normandy after D-Day on June 6, 1944. Canadian forces landed on Juno Beach, facing fierce resistance from the 12th SS Panzer Division. The bocage country, dense hedgerows dividing fields, was perfect for ambushes. German snipers initially held the advantage, picking off Allied troops from concealed positions. But the Canadians flipped the script. Snipers from the 3rd Canadian Infantry Division, including the Regina Rifle Regiment, countered with superior marksmanship. One such hero was Sergeant Harold Marshall of the Calgary Highlanders, who racked up over 100 confirmed kills throughout the war. Marshall, a prairie boy with a hunter's patience, used the hedgerows to his advantage, crawling through ditches to get within range. In the battle for Cannes, Marshall and his spotter positioned themselves in a ruined farmhouse overlooking a German strongpoint. For hours, they observed, noting patterns. When a panzer commander emerged from his turret, Marshall's shot found its mark, halting the tank advance. Germans retaliated with artillery, but the snipers had already relocated, striking again from a new angle. This cat-and-mouse game frayed nerves. German diaries captured later revealed soldiers refusing to mun posts, fearing the invisible Canadians. Commanders issued orders to shoot at any suspicious shadow, leading to friendly fire incidents that further demoralized troops. The psychological impact was profound. Snipers targeted not just bodies but minds. By eliminating officers, they created leadership vacuums, causing units to hesitate or retreat. In one chilling episode near Falaise, a Canadian sniper team from the Black Watch Royal Highland Regiment of Canada set up in a forest edge. They methodically picked off members of a German patrol, one by one, over several hours. The survivors, driven mad by the unseen killer, surrendered en masse, babbling about demons in the trees. Such stories spread through the German lines, amplified by rumor, making every Canadian advance seem backed by supernatural precision. As winter approached in 1944, the Scheldt Estuary Campaign tested the snipers in flooded polders and dikes. Here, the cold amplified their menace. Snipers like Léo Major, a young Quebecer with the Regiment de la Chaudière, began his ascent to fame. Major, who would lose an eye to a grenade but refuse evacuation, embodied the unbreakable Canadian spirit. In the watery hell of Walcheren Island, he sniped from church steeples and windmills, his shots echoing across the flats. Germans, wading through floods, felt exposed, knowing a bullet could come from a kilometer away. But the fear wasn't one-sided. Canadian snipers faced counter-snipers, minefields, and the isolation of their role. Many suffered from the weight of their kills, yet their resolve held, driven by duty to king and country. For our audience, think of the letters home, the quiet heroism that built the Canada we know today, a nation of peacekeepers born from warriors. As the Allies pushed into Holland and Germany, the snipers' legend peaked, but dangers mounted. In the next part, we'll dive into the liberation of the Netherlands, where one-eyed wonders and indigenous phantoms turned the tide, leaving Germans quaking in their boots. What happened when a single sniper captured a town? Stay tuned. You won't believe the bravery that followed. The winter of 1944-45 was one of the coldest in living memory. The Dutch people were starving under the hunger winter, and the Canadian Army had one mission: clear the Scheldt, open the port of Antwerp, and then drive north to free the Netherlands. For the German soldier huddled in a flooded ditch or a half-collapsed farmhouse, the worst sound in the world was no longer the whistle of incoming artillery. It was silence, because silence meant the Canadians were close. And somewhere in that silence, a sniper was watching. By early 1945, the reputation of the Canadian sniper had grown into something almost mythical inside the Wehrmacht. Captured German officers spoke of Die Weiße Tod, the White Death, because many Canadian snipers fought in snow smocks that made them vanish against the Dutch dikes and frozen fields. Letters home from ordinary Lancers told of men afraid to light a cigarette, afraid to stand up to piss, afraid even to speak above a whisper after dark. One diary, taken from a dead Feldwebel near the Maas, ended with the line, "If you hear nothing, start praying." The Canadian with the long rifle is listening. The campaign to liberate the Netherlands gave the snipers terrain made in heaven for a marksman and hell for everyone else. Flat, open polders, long straight roads raised on dikes, and villages where every church steeple or windmill could hide a telescope. The Germans learned quickly never to walk in a straight line down a dike road. They learned never to gather more than 2 men in the open. And still they died. Private Léo Major, Regiment de la Chaudière, the tough little French-Canadian from Montreal who had already lost his left eye to a phosphorus grenade in Normandy, became the living embodiment of that terror. In March 1945, during the fighting for Zwolle, Major and his friend Willie Arsenault volunteered to scout the town ahead of the main force. Arsenault was killed by machine gun fire almost immediately. Most men would have pulled back. Major did not. What happened next still sounds like something from a boy's adventure comic, except every detail was confirmed after the war by Dutch civilians and by Major himself in his quiet, matter-of-fact way. Enraged by the death of his friend, Major decided to liberate Zwolle single-handed. Armed with a Sten gun, grenades, and his scoped Ross rifle, he preferred the old straight-pull Ross for its speed and trained hands. He moved into the darkened city just after midnight. He began by firing bursts into the air and lobbing grenades over garden walls, creating the impression of a full company attack. Then he went hunting. A German staff car sped down a side street. Major put 1 round through the windshield and the car crashed into a canal. A sentry on a bridge never knew what hit him. Major walked into a German officer's pub on the main square, kicked open the door, and emptied a magazine into the ceiling. The terrified officers threw down their Lugers and ran. By 4 a.m., he had convinced the garrison that an entire Canadian division was at the gates. 4,000 Germans fled Zwolle that night, leaving behind their weapons, their vehicles, and their nerve. At dawn, Major walked back to his lines, lit a cigarette with his one good eye squinted against the smoke, and told his astonished commander, "Zwolle is ours, sir. No need to shell it." News of Zwolle spread like wildfire through both armies. To the Canadians, it was proof that one determined man with a rifle could still change history. To the Germans, it was the final straw. From that night on, the phrase Der Einäugige Kanadier, the one-eyed Canadian, appeared in situation reports all the way up to Army Group H. But Major was only the most flamboyant. Quieter, deadlier men were working the same magic on a daily basis. In the Reichswald, in February 1945, Corporal Fred Hawkeye Vigor from the Regina Rifles set up in a shot-out water tower with a clear view of a German supply road. For 4 days and nights he never left his perch. He ate cold Kumpo rations, pissed into a bottle, and kept shooting. When he finally came down, his spotter counted 57 confirmed vehicle drivers and officers. The road was blocked with burning trucks, and German traffic simply stopped using it in daylight. Vigor, a soft-spoken Saskatchewan farmer who could drop a gopher at 400 yards back home, just shrugged when asked how he did it. "Same as picking off coyotes raiding the chickens," he said. "You wait till they line up on the horizon, then you touch one off." Indigenous snipers continued to haunt the Germans with an almost supernatural reputation. Sergeant Tommy Prince, now operating with the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, was inserted behind German lines near the Vaal River with orders to disrupt reinforcements heading for Arnhem's relief. For 9 days, Prince lived in a drainage culvert, emerging only at night. He cut telephone lines, laid improvised explosives, and sniped officers for distances that made German countersnipers think they were facing a whole platoon. When a German patrol finally discovered his hide, they found it empty except for a calling card, a moccasin print in the mud, and a single .303 casing placed neatly on a stone. Prince was already 5 kilometers away, heading for his next target, The psychological warfare reached its peak in April 1945 as 1st Canadian Army closed on Groningen in the north. German commanders began issuing frantic orders. No officer above the rank of lieutenant was to expose himself in forward positions. All movement on roads had to be at night and in dispersed groups. Any soldier caught skylining himself was to be shot by his own comrades as an example. Desertion skyrocketed. In some sectors, entire companies threw down their weapons when they heard the distinctive crack of a Lee-Enfield in the distance, convinced the dreaded Canadian snipers were already among them. Even the Waffen-SS, supposedly the elite of the elite, cracked. A captured Lee-Enfield from the 34th SS Division Landstorm Nederland broke down during interrogation and begged the Canadians not to hand him over to those Indians with the long rifles. He was convinced the snipers were First Nations warriors who could see in the dark and never missed. The interrogator, trying not to smile, assured him the snipers were just ordinary farm boys from Alberta and Manitoba. The prisoner refused to believe it. By the time Canadian troops entered the cities of the Netherlands, Apeldoorn, Deventer, Leeuwarden, the German will to resist had been shot away one careful bullet at a time. Dutch civilians, half dead from hunger, lined the roads waving homemade orange flags and pressing flowers, eggs, and kisses on the bewildered young Canadians who had become their saviors. Old men wept openly when they learned the snipers who had made the Germans flee were often only 20 or 21 years old. Yet the war still had one last savage twist waiting in the muddy fields and dense forests of northwest Germany. In the final part, we'll follow the Canadian snipers into the heart of the Reich itself, Oldenburg, Leer, and the last desperate stand at the Cussen Canal, where some of the longest confirmed kills of the entire war were made, where a single bullet could decide the fate of thousands, and where the White Death claimed its final victims. You'll hear the shot that ended a regiment, the night a sniper held a bridge alone, and the quiet morning in May when the rifles finally fell silent. Don't turn away now. The best and the hardest is still to come. April 1945. The Reich was bleeding out. From the east came the thunder of the Red Army. From the west, the steady, relentless advance of the British and Canadian armies. For the German soldier still holding a rifle, there was nowhere left to retreat except into the North Sea. And standing between him and the water were the men he feared most, the Canadian snipers who had hunted him from Sicily to the Scheldt, and who now carried the war into the fatherland itself. The terrain in northwest Germany suited them perfectly, flat dairy country cut by canals, dotted with brick farmhouses and clumps of pine forest. Every dike was a firing platform, every church tower a crow's nest. The Germans called the area Sniper's Paradise. They did not mean it as a compliment. On April 12th, the Lake Superior Regiment, Motor, pushed toward the town of Leer on the EMS River. A single fortified crossroads held up the advance for 2 days, a stone farmhouse surrounded by open beet fields, ringed with machine gun nests and a pair of 88mm guns. The regiment's commander asked for volunteers to remove the problem. 2 men stepped forward, Corporal Aubrey Cozens from Porcupine, Ontario, and his spotter, Rifleman Smokey Smith, no relation to the Victoria Cross winner. They crawled out at dusk with nothing but a Lee-Enfield, a Bren gun for emergencies, and a bottle of rum. They reached a drainage ditch 900 yards from the farmhouse and waited for first light. At 5:47, Cozens fired his first round of the day. The German battery commander, standing on the farmhouse steps with a mug of ersatz coffee, dropped as if someone had cut his strings. 43 minutes later, the second 88 was leaderless. By 9 o'clock, every officer and NCO who showed his head above the sandbags was dead. The surviving gunners hitched their pieces to half-tracks and fled, leaving the guns behind. The crossroads fell without a single Canadian infantry casualty. Cozens was killed by a stray mortar bomb 3 weeks later, but the regiment still talks about Cozens' morning. Further north, along the Cussen Canal, the South Alberta Regiment ran into the last coherent German defense west of Wilhelmshaven, the 2nd Marine Infantry Division, fanatics who had been told the Canadians skinned prisoners. On April 26, the young Acadian sniper from New Brunswick, Private Gerard Boudreau of Les Fusiliers Montroyal, was sent forward with orders to break the deadlock at a vital road bridge near Delfzijl. Boudreau set up in the loft of a burned-out windmill 1,100 yards from the bridge. For 36 hours he never moved. He shot the bridge commander at 9:12 on the 27th. He shot the replacement at 11:47. He shot the third officer who tried to organize a withdrawal at 16:05. Each time the Germans dragged the body away and sent another man. Each time the crack of the Lee-Enfield answered. By nightfall, the bridge was littered with greatcoats, and no one would cross it in daylight. At dawn on the 28th, the Germans blew the charges themselves rather than face another day under Boudreau's telescope. The Canadians walked across the canal unopposed. Boudreau's score for those 2 days was never officially confirmed, but the bridge platoon surrendered to him personally, 47 men who laid down their rifles and begged the invisible Canadian not to shoot them in the back as they walked away. The longest confirmed shot of the entire European war by a Commonwealth soldier was made in those final days. On May 3, 1945, near Bad Zwischenen, Corporal Harold Pringle of the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment lay in a peat bog for 14 hours waiting for a clear sight line on a German staff car speeding along a raised road. The range was measured after the war at 1,870 yards, over a mile. Pringle, a lumberjack from Belleville who used to drop moose at half that distance back home, took a full breath, let half out, and squeezed. The driver slumped, the car rolled into the ditch, and a panzer brigade that had been waiting for orders spent the next 6 hours leaderless. Pringle packed his rifle, crawled away through the bog, and was back in time for supper. He never bragged about it. Someone else found the map reference months later. By the first week of May, the German front in the north was simply dissolving. Soldiers threw away their weapons and walked west with their hands up, shouting Nick Skiasen, Canada's Scharfschützen. They weren't surrendering to tanks or artillery. They were surrendering to the myth that had walked ahead of the Canadian divisions for 2 years. On May 5, 1945, at 8 o'clock, German emissaries signed the surrender of all forces in northwest Germany, Denmark, and the Netherlands to General Guy Simons of 2 Canadian Corps on the Timeloberg Hill near Lunenburg Heath. Among the Canadian officers present was a quiet sergeant with one eye patched black, Léo Major, invited as guest of honor. When the German delegation asked nervously who the scarred man in the corner was, Simon smiled and said, "One of the reasons you're here today." That afternoon, the snipers cleaned their rifles for the last time. Some wept quietly. Some drank the rum they had saved since Normandy. Many simply stared across the silent fields and tried to remember what peace felt like. They had fired perhaps 30,000 rounds between them in anger. Fewer than 200 men accounted for more than 4,000 confirmed kills and an immeasurable weight of terror that broke armies without ever needing a bayonet charge. They never received the parades of the infantry or the headlines of the airmen. Most went home to farms and factories, hung the medal ribbon in a drawer, and spoke of it only when the beer was flowing and the grandchildren asked, "Grandpa, what did you do in the war?" They did what Canadians have always done, showed up, did the job better than anyone expected, and then went quiet. But on quiet nights, somewhere in northern Germany, an old man will still wake sweating at the memory of a single rifle crack echoing across a frozen field, and he will whisper a name he never forgot. Der Weiss Tod. And somewhere in Canada, an old soldier with steady hands and faraway eyes will smile, just a little, knowing the ghost was real, and that he once carried it on his shoulder for king, for country, and for the boys who never came home. Lest we forget.